Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. I hope everybody can hear me okay. Let me know. I can yell. It's really going to be, not a short group, a small group of us today, so it's going to be an open, friendly conversation. We do have some prepared questions that we're going to ask our panelists related to each of their specialties, and then really I want to open up the floor. If anybody else has any questions that spring to mind, if you came here with a burning question, feel free, let me know, raise your hand, and we can go ahead and jump in. And then I do want to mention that afterwards we'll have a little bit of a wine hour, so if everybody wants to stick around, we'll be serving a little bit of wine, and we'll invite you to hang out and network with the speakers as well. So let's go ahead and get started, guys. So welcome to the Bethesda Green's Innovation Lab Summer Speaker Series, where we tackle environmental challenges through sustainable entrepreneurship. During this series, we're discussing ideas that impact people, the planet, and profits. And so that's a note as well. If you guys didn't know it was a series, it is. There are 2 more sessions happening, one later this week and one Thursday next week as well. So please check them out, come back, join us. We're a friendly crew. My name is Emily Bernard. I'm the program manager of the Innovation Lab here at Bethesda Green. And we really appreciate you guys coming to join us for this first session of the 2023 Summer Speaker Series, where we'll discuss how we can achieve responsible fashion. Of course, I'll just take a minute here to introduce our work here at Bethesda Green, which we organize under 2 primary categories, Be Green Business and Be Green Living. The Be Green Living program elevates community engagement and enhances the quality of life for local residents through all of our projects, like our efforts to improve stormwater management, promote street-level recycling, and improve access to green spaces. Under our Be Green Business program, we support leaders who are building for-profit business models around innovative and sustainable solutions to tackle both environmental and social challenges. We welcome mission-aligned idea stage through seed stage startup companies to join our innovation lab. And I invite anybody who's ready and excited to join our growing community to grab some food and drink and chat with me afterwards if you'd like to learn more. And of course, I'd like to acknowledge our amazing network of partners and sponsors for supporting us and supporting the work that we do. So let's get into it. According to the UN, the fashion industry is responsible for about 10% of global greenhouse emissions and 20% of global water waste. Now, more than ever, the rapid mass production of cheap and trendy clothing, which is dubbed fast fashion, enables customers to constantly replace their wardrobes. In the end, a staggering 85% of textiles wind up in landfills and incinerators. And as concerns about climate change intensify, the fashion world is progressively embracing eco-friendly materials, ethical label practices, and circular economy principles. Today, we're hoping to shed some light on some of the people and practices that can transform an inherently unsustainable industry in our changing world. Today, we're welcoming Michelle Jaffe, the founder and creative director of Jolie, a local store committed to providing sustainably and ethically made clothing and accessories. Joelle Firzli, the co-founder and managing partner of Tribute Collective, an online shop with the mission of creating a platform to increase access to responsible and ethical clothing. And Rafiq Jennings, the Fix-It DC program manager for the Department of Energy and Environment, the DC Department of Energy and Environment, who in his own time created the Fix-It DC program to help the community create a culture of repair and reuse. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
So first off, I think we'll just kind of start here. How do you guys define responsible fashion within your own perspectives? How do sustainable practices, both on the producer and the consumer side, factor into that definition? And we can go ahead and start however you want.
Hello everyone, thank you for inviting me today. So I think the way I look at responsible fashion is from a 360 point of view. So you look at everything on the producer side, from actually growing the cotton, watering the cotton, weaving the cotton, producing, manufacturing, designing, packaging, I mean the whole process and the whole life cycle of making a garment. And we don't stop here. We look also at the way it's packaged, the way it's sold, and then the way it's used, and the way what happened after it's used, it's post-consumption. So basically, you are looking at this 360 way of looking at the whole fashion system, trying to understand how to produce goods, good for the planet, good for the people, in a non-linear way, but in a circular way, where everything that comes out comes back in, ideally, in the system.
Awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I
think that's yeah.
Yeah. It's very comprehensive. No, it's great. Yeah, I mean, and just to get into a little bit more detail, so a lot of the focus, would be on natural fibers, regenerative fibers. There's a lot of hype around recycling synthetic fibers. I think it's really problematic in a lot of ways. So a lot of what I sort of look at is, again, that kind of 360 life cycle that you mentioned, where what happens when the item of clothing is no longer wearable. How can we manage it? Is it biodegradable? Can we recycle it? I think those are a lot of the issues that really go into it. I mean, and then the other component, I think, is also just how we consume, which you mentioned. And I think this is a really interesting, very timely topic. And I even see this and feel the sort of the push and pull of wanting to provide more sustainable options, but also not being part of the problem of overconsumption. And I think this is an area, I haven't fully figured out myself. How do we move forward, in a way that makes sense, that's sustainable, because we know that there is a ton of clothing waste. I mean, a ton of it. And, part of it, I think, is a little bit of a mentality shift. I don't think we're quite there yet, but I think that's going to be the question for the next, I don't know, 10 to 50 years of how do we move forward in terms of consumption.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and when you talk about the product life cycle, and I see two product life cycles for one from the manufacturing side and the other from the consumer side, and the fast fashion, just the throwaway mentality. That's the other aspect. We talk a lot about the manufacturer being as sustainable as possible in their manufacturing and supply lines and distribution. But the other part of it is also the consumer side and changing the mentality of repairing, teaching how to sew, and those type of things. The skill sets that we need to just for the whole society to be able to make use and reuse pretty good fabric that's just maybe has a nick or maybe can be repaired. Those are the two parts that have to, for totality of responsible fashion. It's not just a manufacturing side, it's two sides.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate all those answers and all our circles as well.
Many circles.
So we've kind of gotten into that, so I'm going to go ahead and lead down this route. But as far as the consumer side of things, what are some of those social and economic trends that are affecting their decisions and their desire for both long-term style, but also for fast fashion? And how do you guys see yourselves kind of in each of your own programs, in each of your own businesses? How do you see yourselves fitting into those issues?
I'll go ahead and take the lead on that one, because it's something that I talk about with, I had a store, talking with customers, is really just the idea of a little bit more timeless fashion, on one level, producing things that are quality, that aren't just in the moment, things that you would want to wear today and you would want to wear 5 years from now. I think some of that is a little bit generational. When you talk about younger people, I think there's a lot more of a desire to have the latest in the moment fashion. So I think when you look at it, you almost have to segment it a little bit in that way. The other thing I will say is with the internet, with social media, with the way people consume, it's so easy now to just buy things, buy anything. You can buy it at 3 a.m. And the way the sort of psychology of selling, from these brands works is it's like, oh, well, you can save even more if you buy 10, instead of buying the one thing you wanted, and so I think a lot of it plays upon that kind of psychology, and I don't know how we fully get away from that. I think that's another thing I think about a lot is how do we shift our own thinking that we maybe don't need as much, or that we want to invest in things that are more timeless, that are going to last. I think that's a conversation that I think doesn't just involve people in fashion. I think it involves people in business, people in marketing, and it's going to be a difficult thing to address, I would say, just from a singular standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, with consumer fast fashion, I think a lot of things influence, these cheap buy one get 4,000 free. I think one of the things that sort of put a brake on a lot of fast fashion is supply chain issues and everything, and that really does influence how consumers get that 10-cent cotton T-shirt from Bangladesh over to an H&M store in less than a week. Those got broken up, and I think that sort of indirectly made locally sourced product, which is part of the responsible fashion that we need. So a lot of outside factors can also change consumer habits and everything, but also you have to promote, the skill. I always go back to skill sets, like the ability to sew and create your own dresses and shirts and things like that on social media and everything. Those skill sets need to be, redistributed throughout the society for, I think, for it to catch on.
Yes, and to add on that, I think there is a way to look at it from a little bit of a philosophical point of view. Us as human beings, we think that the more we own things, the more we're happy, the happiest we tend to be. And I think that's talking about fast fashion, this idea of owning. I come out of the store and I have 5 bags and full of clothes, and so I feel like I'm wealthy, that I have so much. But actually, at the end, unfortunately, it's something that you would wear because of a fad or a trend, and then it's just going to trickle down, and then you're going to dispose of it, and then you have that other issue of consumers' waste. So it's a lot of personal income and financial challenges when you talk about sustainable fashion or ethical fashion and fast fashion. There's always that question. That's why thrifting is a great example of how you can still shop responsibly and ethically without having to go to the big brands that are sustainable. And I think at the end, yes, it's an educational change that us as people, we are wired to think that something that we see in a magazine, we should have it, and we're gonna look cool or we're gonna look nice if we have the latest fashion. But actually, again, it's fashion is all about creativity and expression. So if you start thinking in the opposite side, we can also start doing, creating your identity with other options than just buying new or buying cheap and fast. So I think some consumers there is social justice in your mind when you think about shopping most of the time now. As a consumer that shops responsibly, I think about social justice. Who made my clothes? What are the fibers? What's going to happen after? How can I discard of it? What is the company? Who am I giving my dollars to? And then on the other side, the environmental justice. What are the effects on, directly on me as a consumer, but also in Bangladesh, in that poor village next to a river, next to a textile factory that is, feeling the impact and the consequences of the chemical dyes floating in their own rivers. Sorry, I'm grim.
No, but that's the whole.
Yeah,
that's
like
the whole
360.
thing. It's the 360. It's the whole thing.
It's our circle.
Yeah.
Well, Joelle, you kind of started going there, so I'm gonna point this one directly to you. Why are cultural knowledge and historical preservation of cultural techniques within fashion so important, and how does Tribute Collective highlight these alongside your sustainability initiatives?
So I'll go back to Rafiq. Sewing and mending. So basically, when you look at the history of fashion, you can tell the history of civilization. It's a little bit like an art historian. A fashion historian will understand why us as a people, as a civilization, as a community, wore what we wore, throughout the ages, and why this synthetic fabric in the 70s, and why this wool in the early 19th century, etc. So I think if you understand fashion, and the more you understand fashion, the more you understand what you put on your body. It's exactly the same thing with food. So the more you understand a specific technique of stitching or a specific embroidery pattern, you'll understand that this is coming from that specific area of the world, and it was worn by this specific community. So by understanding culture and by wanting to preserve it in the fashion system, I think you value tradition, you value the people, you value the story, you value the object, you nurture that story, and then you just make sure to care more, I think, about, what you are wearing. I just saw an exhibition in DC at the Museum of the Palestinian People. They have an exhibition on traditional stitching, embroidery, Palestinian embroidery, and they explain to you that each stitch, each pattern represents a different meaning, and also represents a different people. So if I'm wearing a shirt, a dress with a specific cross stitching, it means that I'm from this area of Palestine. It means that I'm one of those people. So for me, that explained it. It's a story that is, we wear our clothes on our bodies. They're so close to us. Of course, I think it makes sense to understand the whole culture behind it. And so that's what we do at Tribute. We tell stories. We try to educate people as much as we can. So we give them all the tools so they can make their better choices. As buying, as consumer, but also as citizens in a world where they are wearing, and I won't go into cultural appropriation, but understand what you're wearing in order to be a better person and a better citizen.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Rafiq, I want to go ahead and move to you because you've been mentioning your sewing and your fixing. So can you start at the basics with how did the Fix It DC program come about, and then how does it align with the DC Department of Energy and Environment and the DC government goals as well?
Okay, so we started Fix It DC in the before the pandemic.
When was that?
So far ago.
We did the workshop a long time ago.
Awesome, very cool.
Yeah.
I didn't know you guys were connected.
Yeah, through his old partner.
Yeah. So we started initial rollout of the Fix It program, and of course the pandemic changed everything. In the time during the pandemic, we the first pre-pandemic Fix Its were smaller, solely done by DOEE, partnered with local community organizations, and hopped around. During the pandemic, we focused on partnering with assets and resources we had within the district government that were already in-house. So coming out of the pandemic, we partnered with the public library, DC Public Library, and we have a standing every month, at least once a month, if not twice a month. We have one at the downtown library, Central Library at MLK. And then we've slowly expanded out of that location to have other ones. Our next one is this Saturday in Lederer Gardens in Northeast. So we're slowly expanding the program. And how it relates throughout the rest of the district total plan, I always refer people back to the district DOEE and the district government's Sustainable 2.0 plan, which is to create the leading green, resilient, sustainable city in America by 2032. And part of that plan is reuse and within the of resources and everything. And without and to that, Fix It is part of the reuse goals of the district government, and so and within that, Fix It is one of the programs. We also have Rethread, which is trying to get resources connected to so people know where to donate or where to find thrift stores and where to get clothes repaired and where to do proper disposal.
Awesome. And so if I wanted to participate in Saturday's event, can I come with only clothes, or are there also household items that are accepted as well?
So the Fix It program is a community engagement program where we have coaches who coach people who bring their broken household items. Mm-hmm. So we're looking at household items. Although I did get an email about a stackable washer and dryer that somebody wants to bring in. So if they can bring it in, we have really great volunteer coaches who will give a shot at it. And we've always had, because of the history with Rethread and the prior events with that, we've always had a strong textile aspect to the Fix It program. So it's not just toasters and lamps and coffee makers. It's also, I think we've had the most success, with people bringing in clothes, jackets, and repairing. I've seen a wedding dress get repaired and all that kind of stuff. So we've always had a strong textile aspect to the Fix It program. So we're looking at pretty much all common household.
Okay.
But we might have a washer and dryer. We'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see.
You let us know if you're able to bring that down. Michelle, I want to go ahead and jump to you. So something that we came up with, you and I were talking, was about how there are different influences that factor into the fashion industry, and one of them, of course, being government and government policies, as well as standards and sustainability standards. So how do these government policies, like tax incentives and sustainability standards around the world, help promote some of the sustainable practices in the fashion industry? And what has your experience with Jolie Kai been like using and building off of those, both those incentives as well as the standards?
Sure. I think they're immensely important, and you see this in a lot of other industries outside of fashion. We've seen this in the automobile industry, in the energy industry, that both regulation and tax incentives play a huge role, and it's sort of a shame in the U.S. that we haven't really seen this applied to textiles, fashion. So I definitely think we need more of it. One of the things with my store is that I primarily carry European brands, and part of the reason for that is just because they have these standards in place, and they have been producing for much longer these kinds of products. And for me, a lot of it is looking at how it's produced. Location gets really tricky. Even if it's a U.S. brand, it's not necessarily produced here. So it's incredibly nuanced in that way. We also don't have, I think it was in 2020 or 2021, we got the first Global Organic Textiles certified producer in our country. So we don't really have the infrastructure necessarily to produce. And when I talk about sustainable, I'm talking about the dyes, I'm talking about the fabrics, how they're grown, all of those things really play into it. So we're just a lot more limited in terms of what's happening locally. But in terms of Europe, they have had, various standards, chemical standards, things that can go into clothing. They also have really strong standards in terms of greenwashing. So greenwashing is a term you may have heard of. You can't make claims that are unsubstantiated, and if you do, there are avenues for legal repercussions. And you've actually seen that. Everybody's heard of H&M. They've had lawsuits filed against them by the European Union. They're really a lot more conscientious about this idea of making claims, whereas in the U.S. you can pretty much say anything, and there are going to be zero repercussions. I think in terms of me as a small business, I think it's even harder because there aren't really a lot of resources out there that are specific to small businesses. If you're working on a larger scale, I think it's easier to find opportunities or even create opportunities, where you could go to a municipal government and say, hey, we want to do this, what kind of incentives will you give us? But as a small business, those options really aren't out there. So I see it in terms of the product that I carry and where it's coming from and why. But as a small business, it's just a lot harder to find that support, I will say. And I wish there was more of it. I mean, and we talked a little bit about that actually earlier today. I think, I'd love to see cities and municipalities really reaching out to small businesses, because my attitude is if we don't make better products available, it's, how are we going to get the consumer to change? We want it to be accessible. We want it to be relatively easy, because, there is the diehard consumer that will seek it out. But then there's a lot of people that just, they say, well, I've got this to do, I've got that on my plate, I can't, go out of my way. But if you make it easy for people to do, then they will do it. They will make better decisions.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. You brought up greenwashing, so why don't we just go to this question? So what are some of those terms, labels, and certifications that customers can trust to be a marker of either a real sustainable or a real climate action or climate activist in a fashion brand?
I mean, I think this is where it does get confusing for a lot of consumers, and it's really hard to navigate, unfortunately. One of the standards I tend to look for, and a lot of, people that would buy my products look for, is the Global Organic Textile Standard, or GOTS. We often call it GOTS, kind of the shorthand. It's really, so the focus is on natural fibers. So not all fibers are certified under GOTS. So that's one thing just to keep in mind. There may be decent brands or decent fibers out there that just aren't covered under the certification, but overall, what I like about it is that it's really comprehensive, from the growing of the raw materials to the manufacturing. It has a human ethical component that's built in. So the working conditions in the factory, the fair labor, fair wage, and then it even gets into packaging, which is something you brought up earlier, which a lot of people don't think about. There is so much waste in fashion with packaging. One of the things I've seen a lot, and this is a little interjection, I apologize, with my brands, is that they're really, really shifting towards minimalist packaging, the sustainable brands, which is amazing to see.
Sometimes no packaging.
No packaging, or just a little paper strip around the garment. I have one brand that does that. There are challenges to doing this in some ways, especially when you're shipping products. But I think that's really, it's a great thing to see. So I will say that, that's one of the things I really like about this particular standard. I would say it's probably the gold standard of sustainable certifications that we have right now. It just doesn't cover everything. So if you're using recycled cotton content that's not necessarily, you don't know if it's organic, it can't be certified organic, it may not be covered under this. So there are some exceptions, I would say. The other thing is, I think ethical and fair trade standards are really important in this space. And I think what you'll tend to find is if there is also another standard like that, you're looking at producers that are really thinking about it in a much more holistic way. They're really committed to the process of producing sustainably. So I think it's important that that is there, even if you don't see the GOTS certification. You want to see some form of fair trade certification. I know everybody doesn't have time to, but if you ever have a question, always look it up. Always kind of put it out there. Say, hey, well, I saw this, they said they do this. Do a little research, because you can find a lot of information out there about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Joelle, have you come across any of those, either the ethical or the fair trade standards?
I think, there's so many of them now.
There's not a gold standard.
And there's so many of them in Europe, there's so many of them in the US. Yeah. B Corp, I would add just the B Corp stuff. once a company like Eileen Fisher being B Corp, you know a little bit that the company is how they operate. It's all fully, they are transparent mostly. So you can read about them online, read their report. But I agree, read reports, like do your due diligence before you buy, especially a new brand. Read the report and learn how to read the label. Try as much as you can to read that label, see if it's natural fibers, as Michelle mentioned, is ideal, but then you can get also recycled. If you're dealing with man-made fibers, recycled polyester, recycled rayon it's working, it's okay, it's recyclable, we can put them back, but try to avoid a hybrid product, something that is 5% spandex, 10% polyester, I don't know, and then silk and nylon mix. So those for us is very difficult to recycle at the end of the process, and actually it doesn't, they cannot recycle it. They're still trying to figure out, those machines don't exist. So the technology is being created slowly. Unfortunately, most of it is in Europe because of the incentives that Michelle talked about, because the government is not only incentivizing brands, but also companies, recycling companies, to develop new machines that can help us to take a fiber and just split the fibers between a synthetic and a non-synthetic, a man-made and a natural fiber.
Thank you for that. Rafiq, I want to move over to you, and I want to ask, how can customers be educated and empowered to make more responsible fashion choices at every stage of the cycle, from purchasing to maintaining to disposing of items? And if you could particularly focus on the disposal of items, because I know we've talked a lot about purchasing at this point.
Knowledge is everything. So doing the research and going out and looking out for brands that have certification, outside certification, that you understand that, oh, this makes sense, it's organic, I understand what that means. That's one thing, but also reusing and going to a thrift store first, and maybe doing that first before you even going to a new brand. That's also ways of empowering consumer choices, because with consumer choices, the major brands follow. So when you see these smaller brands doing very good work, and this is where it comes into doing your research, you'll see that, I'm not going to say a brand, but a large brand now has eco jeans. Yeah. What does that mean? And everything like that. And that's where you have to do your research, because you think you're doing the right thing, and you're just it's continuing on the same fast fashion that we're trying to get away. So knowledge empowers the consumer to make better choices and everything. And then when you go to the other side, to disposal, that's where it gets hard, because the easiest thing is just to throw it in the trash, and that becomes the problem. But it also goes back to knowledge, to making, instead of throwing it away, what can I do with this? Or when you get to proper disposal, is this reusable, or is it just not good for me? So that means, is this a thrift store quality, or is there a donation center or anything like that? And then from there, it's okay. Is anyone looking for scrap fabric? And that's one of the things that DC government is trying to do with our reuse website, reuse.dc.gov, is connect. Sorry, just had to put the plug in there. But putting resources for donating, not wearable clothing to these manufacturers that are looking for clean scrap to make into insulation or whatever industrial process they've come up with. So it's knowledge and making those connections.
Yeah, absolutely.
And may I just add also something on the certification? I think it's important to understand that those certifications are not cheap too. Mm-hmm. So they cost between 15,000, 20,000 plus. So for a small company to be able to get that certification, it's quasi impossible. It takes 10, sometimes even more years of work, of due diligence. So you again, the research component is so important, because it's very easy for H&M to say, oh, I'm using GOTS certified cotton. But then when you discover that they're using it in 0.1% of their production, what does it change? It makes zero change, basically. So that's greenwashing, basically. Also, it's very easy to say that this big company has got certified cotton, where a small company cannot afford actually to be there because they just started, because they need to produce. That's all they need to do is produce and sell, produce and sell. So yeah, at the end of the day, it's the certification is amazing, but the research is also very important. So you can also contribute to the well-being of some smaller fashion brands that would like to get there but don't have the means, the financial means.
I will say though, because I've seen a lot of the brands I work with are smaller. Some of them are family-owned businesses, and the one thing I learned, I did a little research into producing and talking with someone at GOTS and or the organization, and there's a lot. It's the manufacturer. So a lot of the brands, they don't necessarily have their own factories. They're not necessarily producing it, with their own employees, but they're working with factories. So one thing I will say is that there is a fairly strong network now of producers out there, and kind of to go back to what you said, I'm seeing a lot of these fabrics that these brands have been working with, these smaller brands. I'm now seeing these larger companies start to use them more, but unfortunately, like you say, it may only be 0.1 or maybe even 5% of what they sell. So and the one thing I always tell people, when you support a smaller brand, you're really supporting just a mission and intent in the way that you're not when you buy from a larger brand, because a larger brand can change their policy at any point in time. They can go from producing, something GOTS certified to saying, this economic model doesn't really work for us. We're just going to shift. Whereas when you work with these smaller companies that were sort of founded with these intents to do better, to whether it's ethical production, sustainable production on every level, you can feel confident that they're actually doing what they say they're going to do, and you can feel confident that they're going to continue to do what they say they're going to do. And so I do really encourage people to support small brands, because it's very easy for them to then get swallowed up as these bigger brands say, oh, we're going to do this or we're going to do that now. And they were really the ones creating this network from the beginning, and I think we should support that.
Yeah, absolutely. At this point, I do want to open up the floor, and I want to say if anybody has any questions that are coming to mind, you can kind of see where our speakers come from at this point. Anything out there that's sticking out to you? Yeah, Scott, go ahead.
I was just curious about the current, and this is just something I'm just kind of aware of, like what is the current breakdown of where, clothes after they're being worn, where do most clothes go to? Like I go to a lot of thrift stores and like clearly there's a lot going there, but obviously a lot being thrown away. Do we know like the general scale of like, are most clothes being thrown away?
Oh yeah, landfills.
Is it
I think
85%? Is that the number, 85?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah,
85.
they're sometimes burned. I mean, that's very...
Although they can stay there for hundreds of years because
Yeah.
polyester is it's chemical. It doesn't disintegrate. That's why, during the talk we're pushing more for biodegradable, and which exists today, the Econile and all the knives and the utensils and all of that. So that's why it's important to read the label, make sure that what you're buying is as much as you can get away from synthetics. As much as you can, I would say. But then with rethread, aren't you also recycling or like taking it?
Yeah, we're connecting vendors and businesses with people
networks.
We're creating those networks to connect these people so that clothes are properly destroyed or reused. However, that goes.
Absolutely.
Is the primary issue that people like access to donating your clothes? Like it's just not convenient to go to the Goodwill or.
Well,
like, is that just access to?
I can tell you with Goodwill, they get inundated sometimes, and they don't have enough capacity for all the stuff, and then someone donates a box with bed bugs. So they've actually, if you tried to donate to Goodwill, they've gotten a little more. Their standards have gotten high, and I always blame that Marie Kondo. The amount of stuff that they got after that, they had to change their policies. So, and that's just for clothes to be reused. But there's clothes that are not wearable or usable that are still have good use as rags or before you even throw it away. And even at that point, after that, you shred it. They can be used for insulation. There's all types of industrial processes.
Sheets or so.
Yeah.
Think about your sheets.
So there's a lot of stuff that it can. And so one is finding those manufacturers for, in my context, in the DC metro area that are doing that, and then connecting them with DC residents who would like to donate to them.
And I think it goes back to what both of you said about just the lack of facilities or technology and the lack of incentivizing sort of creating that. We don't have a lot of options for where these things can go. So even if, say, the DC government would like to take all of your clothes that you're throwing away, they don't have the capacity to manage it, or the companies don't exist that can take it and recycle it, or not in mass. So a lot of it, it's just that infrastructure doesn't exist in the way that we need it to exist. But on the other end, it's also the consumption. And I apologize, I forget the percentage, but I think in the year they compared it to, but we are now consuming, I want to say at least 5 times as much in terms of clothing as we used to. It's really quite staggering. We buy so much more, and I do think a lot of it is just that it is so easy to access, and it's become, and I think there's a lot of psychology at play in how we do that and how we shop, and just really a rethinking about that, a cultural shift, if you will, about how we think of consumption and, with respect to clothing. But I think it's a lot of consumer goods where we've kind of gotten into this mode. Always having the latest, every year there's a new phone, your phone upgrades its model, that kind of mentality is really taken a hold. So how do we redirect that, I think, is also a big part of dealing with how do we create less waste to begin with.
In the back, you had a question.
Yeah, I have a bunch of questions and comments, but I'll try to link it with the one that you just talked about. So first of all, I've been really proactive about food waste in my community and Chevy Chase, and I've just noticed educating people. I tried to make a bin available for free. We partnered with Compost Crew, tried to get the landlord on board. There is so much resistance to doing something that's not easy, and trying to convince people, like even educated PhDs all upstairs, put their clothes in the trash. I started monitoring the trash for food, but then I'm seeing ties and suit coats and dresses and all kinds of things, and these are not people who lack information or lack ability to process information or lack caring. They talk constantly about how they care about the environment, but I think there's a disconnect between feeling like what their personal actions will do when people around them are not also doing it. I don't know how we get peer pressure to play a role in this change, but I really feel like that's, and it's not clothing, but for example, in Seoul, Korea, it's total shame to dispose of any food. And they have zero food waste. It's so efficient. The government makes a ton of money by collecting food waste, providing bins everywhere around the city. I don't know if with fashion there's another way to create a system that, I think it's a system that's lacking. Also the mindset, because the mindset of wasting food is the same as of wasting clothes. We buy it not knowing where it came from or caring much about how it was packaged or how it was grown or who, just such a slow shift in the mindset. So that was one of my comments.
So I think, I don't know if it's New York now that has a pink bins. Have you heard about the pink bins?
I've heard, but I'm not really familiar with it.
So I don't know if New York has, or if it's San Francisco, I don't know. They have pink bins where you can actually put clothes. Because as you said, people don't know that I've seen friends of mine throwing pouches, like little cotton pouch, in the garbage. And I'm like, no. And they're like, where am I supposed to throw it? And I'm like, not in the garbage. Give it to me, or like, but then when she asked me what am I supposed to do with it, I don't have an answer. I just take it because through my company I know where to donate it, or I worked with Rethread on doing that, or I can, reach out to a recycling company in Virginia that can do that. But it is an issue, but I think the Stop Scrap in New York is doing a good work. They come and they pick up your scraps, so you can call them. They have a pickup truck, and they come and she takes bags of scraps, and then she is in touch with recycling companies, and she has her network, and then so I think in DC Kaveri tried to do it. I don't know if one of your members can.
Whenever we do have an event, a Swap Nista, Rethread, a Fix It, any type of reuse or community event, people are like, oh, this is a great idea. So, once we bring it to people, and they do enjoy and respond. It's just capacity, budget allocated. We still can't swim in Anacostia, so.
I think definitely making it easier for people.
Me trying to get 4 more staffers.
Or educating people.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on that. I think marketing can play a really strong role in this. I mean, I see this every day with my business, like the power of marketing. I mean, sometimes it's to the point where I don't like what I see, and it's hard. I'm old enough to remember a time without social media marketing, and then I see kind of the constant pull, what the people, what is the term, everything's aspirational, right? Everything, is you need this, you need that, and we sort of, people are developing relationships with social media, with marketing in a way that's probably pretty unhealthy. And I think we're seeing a lot of those outcomes in a lot of aspects of society. But I always think, well, how do we use that for good, right? How do we take the power of marketing and social media and get a different message out there? And I think there are opportunities, but you have to be really creative in the way that you do it. You have to make it on some level entertaining, and we're all intelligent people here, and we think, well, like you said, these are PhDs, they should understand the logic of it. But to grab somebody's attention, you really need to use tools and techniques and ways to sort of touch them in a way that isn't just giving me information or admonishing me, and I see that's just. So I do think there's an opportunity to use marketing and social media in a way to change people's habits. And it's something I've thought about exploring myself, outside of my business, but just in terms of sustainable fashion. But it's hard when you're running a business, you have so many things on your plate, that you have all these great ideas. It's hard sometimes to implement them, but I do think that's the step that we probably need to go in. How do we make this cool? How do we make this the new it thing, if you will? And that's really, it's just human psychology. People want to be a part of something that's hip in the moment, or cool, or feels exciting, or feels like you're empowering them.
You mentioned in South Korea food waste and everything. I point to that and say they have the knowledge and the skill sets to not see that as...
The government did it. It's a government program.
But it's also, they know not to throw the food away.
No, they didn't know that. They educated people, and they fined people who didn't.
And that's what I'm getting at, education and learning to do that. Our hyper-consumer culture that we have now is not an old ancient thing. It's new. Yeah. We've only been doing this for less than 100 years, and we've created these mountains of waste. There's more tradition and history of us being resourceful and reusing everything, and it's just a lost skill. And so I always go, I keep saying, I always go back to knowledge and everything. But those skills of repairing your own clothes, creating your own clothes, making your own clothes, they were doing that in the Great Depression. Mm-hmm. Maybe we don't need those type of inputs to force us to do that, but those skills do. Those skills are dormant in all of us, and we still have it. And I always, it's always sort of like, once you have those skills, you can't unsee it. You know, once you know how to repair things and fix things yourself, you're not going to just throw away a perfectly good T-shirt. You know you can reuse it and everything like that.
And maybe it's the combination of both of you, that not only do you need the knowledge, but you need the marketing in order to get the knowledge out to the masses.
Oh, yeah.
So.
Yeah, but you also need the government to kind of shift and help and incentivize people. And I think what I want to add is also, when something happens so far away from you, you don't see it. So the issues of fast fashion issues, the textile issue, does not happen until now, maybe in the last 5 years. Never happened in the US. You had to go to Vietnam, to Indonesia, to Asia to kind of experiment and experience with mountains of clothing that come from the Western market, to see the state of the supply chain and the factories. So why would people living here, they have absolutely no connection with, so there is a disconnect, yes, with what's happening there, where we're producing, in Kenya, where we're sending loads and loads of I don't want to name any company that does that, but a lot of secondhand clothing end up in, Namibia, in Ghana, in Ivory Coast, in so many places in Africa. I've seen personally. So when you see something like that, you come back and you're just like, okay, this industry has issues. How can we explain those issues to people when only what you want to see? And fashion is escapism. Fashion is dreamy. Fashion is Vogue. Fashion is a beautiful lady with a beautiful man driving a beautiful car. It's very contradictory when you think about like the nightmare that it's creating on the other side of the world.
It's recreation too, which is interesting. I mean, it's a pastime, if you will. One of the things I think, which is you can do with fashion, is the health aspect, and I think that resonates with people a lot. And I will say, this is sort of personal. One of the things that really drew me to sustainable fashion, I mean, I've always had an interest in sustainability and the things that I've done, but seeing, and my family, with my background, seeing the clothing industry, but I am very chemically sensitive. So for me, wearing conventional clothing is a really challenging aspect. I worked for a big retailer, in college one summer, and my eyes would be bloodshot. I mean, at the end of a work day, just from handling the clothing. And I do think that has a pretty strong ability to resonate with people because like you said, you can feel so detached from the process. These factories are half a world away. You don't see the pollution in the rivers. You don't see the health impacts of the workers or the people living in the community. But when you talk about how it impacts yourself, and I because I've spent a lot of time talking with customers, I get a lot of feedback. And I think that's one area, that from a marketing standpoint, that really has a big impact. Now, to explain to people just the human health component, disease, all these chemicals, all of this.
Inflammable.
Right. And that's where I feel like we can probably make inroads a little bit faster. And I do see people becoming more aware. There's a lot more information out there. And people who have power are talking about it more. And that's also important, is that people in positions of power, people in the in the entertainment industry, whatever it is, people that have large influence really can make a huge difference in changing consumer behavior. So that's another.
It came to the Senate. There is a bill being presented in September on, I think it's related much more, and I don't have all the information, but it's related much more to garment workers and also supply chain issues. So, if hopefully it's going to be voted, hopefully we see changes. But that's where we start. There's a bill in in LA, in California, that was voted against, I think, for garment worker rights. So you see the shift; it's coming because of people talking about it. So yeah.
Yeah, and that's whenever people bring up Made in America, that bill that she's talking about in LA.
No, it's not this one. It's
in California. I'm sorry, in California. That was actually, for the first time, they stated that garment workers had to earn a living wage, and people always assume because they assume because we're in America, everybody earns a living wage, and so somehow we think that we're better, in those practices. But yeah, you had another follow up. I see.
Well, I had quite a few. I saw he had a hand too. But there's a documentary called Fashion Reimagined. It's about
it's gorgeous.
Mother of Pearl's creative director. I think if people are interested in this topic, they might be interested in the film Fashion Reimagined. It's how she tries to make her fashion brand as sustainable as possible.
Yeah, and she goes around, so you see her going from growing the cotton to the suppliers, she goes everywhere, and she makes it happen. So. It's a good one. The true cost is still, I think, one of the oldest, but the harshest one. I think now it's 2004, maybe less, but it's still a good one. But yeah, you have a
The other question is, I didn't catch what you said about H&M. So I have a lot of clothes that I wear till, there's more holes than threads, and they're basically just, you can't really wear them anywhere, and they're too holy to give to a thrift store. So I was looking around for a place just to take the material, because I know the material can be reused, right? And I went through groups that I'm a part of, like DC Eco Women. It was really hard to find anyone, of all these people who are very interested in sustainability, to find anyone who could tell me where to take fabrics, so I had to call different companies, and finally I was told H&M is the only place that actually takes
they have a retake program. Yeah, they do have a retake.
So is that legitimate? Because you were just discrediting them a little bit.
There's some scrutiny, let's say that.
I don't want to be the bully or anything. I believe that H&M has a foundation, that they are investing money into doing the right thing. So their retake program, what I've heard, is a legitimate one. Again, I don't do a lot of research in this. This is, I know that the foundation is helping in a lot of innovative textiles and biodegradable textiles. So,
I think the challenge is they work with partners as well, and they don't always have a good follow-up of what's happening once the product goes to a partner. So they're under some scrutiny right now for that very thing, that some of their items may be landing in landfills in Africa and situations like that. I mean, it's hard. You don't want to totally tamper their initiatives. But it's complex.
Business opportunity there for someone, like I said, there's some people on the guest list were investors who can put to creating a way to make it easier for
but
people. But
we had someone who was doing it here, but she left.
What's that?
Kaveri, she left. It was called textile in exile, textiles. And she was doing it. She was doing it for 3 years non-stop. She was at the World Bank at the same time. It did not work, and then she was not able to raise more funds. She left. She moved back to Florida.
And that's the thing, is finding vendors. We have, DOEE is putting out grants all the time, looking for in various environmental and sustainable and reuse and various different, and finding qualified candidates that we can partner with is surprisingly difficult. And so we're always looking for people to partner with, people who are looking for intake and everything like that. That's the holy grail there, is to find companies and organizations that are doing the intake of and doing proper recycling or reuse, because a lot of times you just see a mound somewhere else.
There was another question.
Sort of related, could you give us some practical advice? If I emptied, here in Bethesda, if I emptied a closet this week, where should I bring those clothes that could be worn again? And where should I bring those clothes and shoes that seem like they're spent and They would not be used again.
I think
Where should I go?
Well, I think you start with the local thrift stores or
Okay, Goodwill.
Salvation Army. I think Martha's Table does intake sometimes.
The Episcopal Church.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there's a lot of different local organizations that will take good intact clothes, and some even will take even tattered certain conditions. The difficult part is when you get to the clothes that are not wearable.
Yeah.
And that's when you start thinking about, what can I do at home with this? Can I use it for rags? Can I find reuse in home? And then when you have what you have remains, proper disposal of that gets harder and harder. I have to double check our reuse website. I don't think we have a current vendor that comes to mind that will intake non-wearable textile, but I'll have to double check. But if we do, we always put it on our website, reuse.dc.gov.
So, and you were mentioning on the left the secondhand clothing market in Africa. Is that a good thing or not a good thing? And like when I know there's like a Planet Aid or some type of bin
there is.
near Westbard, and I hear good or bad.
So I'll make it short.
So I mean, what
because I worked with that. So I grew up there. I grew up in West Africa, so I've seen it, and I lived in Vietnam for 4 years working on this. So there is a for and against. The for is that there's a lot of clothes affordable for the locals, which is great. That they can change their closet more easily. They're excited. They have access. Obviously, the against is on different side. The economic side is that dressmakers and local seamstress and local stores sales drops and they have less work, especially in culture where you have no ready to made. It's all made to order. You go to a dressmaker, you take the fabric, you wrap it up, and you create your, whether it's in Vietnam where I lived and I learned that being there, or even in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire. Now what you start seeing is a lot of locals wearing your clothes from the West, which on the cultural level is a little bit disturbing for also the preservation and the legacy that they are trying to keep, especially where you have a culture of clothing that is so strong in West Africa and in Vietnam and in Southeast Asia. And then at the end of the day, if you don't sell it, what do you do with it? So what happened is that those markets are infested with second-hand clothing from the West, then until they don't sell it, and then they receive another shipment, and then they put more on top of that. Then what do you do with it? So what I've seen is that I was asked to take my shoes off, and I arrived in this village outside of Hanoi, where they asked me to climb a mountain of clothes. Climb, literally, I was shoes off, I was climbing that mountain of clothes. They give you a bag, plastic bag, there's a scale, and they sell you by the pound, by the kilos. And then you look at the labels, and I saw a wedding dress there, and you see all your labels that are here. This and H&M, the Forever 21, the Topshop, Shane did not did not exist. That was 10 years ago. So yeah, then it hits you, and you're just like, wow, this is all coming from my own waste, in the comfort of my house in Washington D.C. or Bethesda or Paris or New York or London, I don't know. So yeah, there's a lot to it. Sorry, I tried to condense it. It's another talk, panel talk. But the last thing that I want to say is countries in Africa, Kenya specifically, I think Nigeria is next, they're putting a ban on their shipment. So the governments are not accepting any shipments of clothing specifically from the US, for example, knowing that they would stand and stay in that. Yeah.
I can just offer, only because I've been sort of on my own personal path to learn all about this, and only for about 9 months now, very intently, but there is a company called 4 Days, FOR Days. They just sent me a bag that I can put fabric in, scan a QR code and send it back to them, and then they give you pay $20 for the bag, but then you can use the $20 towards purchasing on in their shop, which is all sustainable. So to me, that was sort of an interesting concept. I'm going to try it. I just got my first bag. A lot of companies that I follow that are working in the sustainable fashion space are following them on Instagram. So I'm trying to, because to me it's this legitimacy question. It's like, and I have to admit, there's a time commitment that comes to like going down the rabbit hole of like trying to figure out if what someone's doing is greenwashing. So I'm not endorsing them. I'm just offering it to do your own research. But it's called 4 days. And it's called, it can just be scraps. It can be towels, sheets.
I think they're coming to DC for a pop-up. Follow them.
Are they? Okay.
I think they are.
Okay.
Yeah. They're bringing a truck.
Yeah.
And they park, and then you can drop off your bag.
And then you pay for the bag, but it's $20 seems like
Yeah.
a decent entry point, which then they turn into credit to buy something if you want to. That's also theoretically sustainable. I am like, it's.
I think they sell white T-shirts. No, they do cotton T-shirts.
I think they'll take. My understanding is they'll put you.
No, what they sell on their website.
Oh yeah. They have a. Well, they see. I was just
Cottons.
looking again before I said it out loud because again I'm not. But it looks like they have all sorts of things. But again, I haven't researched like where all of their items are coming from. But they're clearly working in this space of like trying to think about the cycle that you started talking about, right? Like if you get rid of something, how do you sort of come back into the circle? And then sort of to that point, because I've been trying to also modify my own behavior, which is proving more challenging than I thought, because I've been a lover of fashion for as long as I can remember, and I have a rising senior in high school who wants to study fashion, and we love thrifting, but it's really like not, we also love Marshalls, and so we're sort of trying to figure out like, and TJ Maxx and all those places. I also would add, Michelle, that part of this I think is it's easy, but it's also cheap. I mean, and we are a comfortable family, but there is something weirdly satisfying about getting a bargain. And so if you go in and buy a dress, I mean, TJ Maxx is notorious for like having it labeled at $120 and you get to pay $39.99, which I think is all BS anyway.
Yeah,
but it is. It's like it's. So I've been trying to modify my own behavior, which is a journey and does slow you down. Even just researching slows down your purchasing, I've noticed, because if you have to look something up, you have to sort of wait to figure out if you're going to buy it. So my question on that is, I have only really found, I've been using this app called Good on You.
Yeah.
Okay. So that great? I like the nodding head.
Yeah, nods.
Right. But is that the only one? Because I also find they don't have all the brands. Like I was trying to look up Ralph Lauren the other day and I didn't have it. So do you know anything about that? Like, I guess my question is, what are you each personally doing, if I might ask, that are sort of like how you do this on a day-to-day basis, other than maybe buying your own clothes for the two of you, and fixing your own things?
Okay, I'll just tell you.
Can I add one other thing to that?
Yeah.
Because we're about at time, so
Okay.
I want this to be the closing question. Can you tell me what's your favorite brand right now?
That would also be great, yeah.
Where are you purchasing from right now? If you can name names.
Okay. Right now, one of my rules is one in, one out. So if I buy a
I'm doing
shirt,
that too.
I got to get rid of a shirt.
Right.
I just bought 2 shirts because I needed one for a wedding and it didn't fit, and I had to go run to a Marshalls to get a shirt. So now that I have to get rid of a shirt, and
Ethically though, right? Or
Yeah.
sustainably.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
just no,
I'm not throwing it away. Yeah, it has to
Right.
be out of the house into
Right, okay.
somewhere.
into the cycles.
Into the cycle somewhere.
Okay.
So that's a personal thing.
Okay,
And
that's
then
good.
I know for the consumerism and the shopping and the clicking, what I do is I put it in the shopping bag on the website, and then I go to another site. I just leave it in the shop. I don't click. Don't set up your auto cards.
Yeah, don't they send you a
Don't
link?
do
Follow you
that. Just
around.
leave it in the bag, and then you close out, and then and then the next time you're on the internet, you remember that site was, and you just close it out. You realize you don't need that
Yeah.
third
Waiting,
bag or the
waiting.
fourth cooler or whatever like that. Those are like the little things that
Okay.
it's
that's
not
fine.
easy, and just this last discussion will show that you just got to do research, and
Well, it's research, and it sounds like it is it's nice to hear that the little things do matter, because sometimes I'm like, it's that whole thing that you were sort of saying, is at some point you have to realize that ultimately change comes from individuals starting to do it. So like, if you can't do it, how are you going to ask other people to do it? But you have to be able to say what you're doing to like, yeah.
if everyone stopped
Manifest
buying
it.
plastic bottles,
Yeah.
they would stop making plastic bottles. I'm telling you,
That's-
that's how it works. So if we stop it as consumers, it just slight little micro things can have really big effects if if it takes hold in the marketplace.
I agree with that, but I think it's a multifaceted solution. I think there is a lot of government laws, incentives, whatever that really, because the thing is, do you want to change it quickly? And the best way to change it quickly is really to change regulation.
But regulation is also individuals. I mean, it's people that are voting.
Yes,
on
no, I agree.
Laws that are,
and so the other side of that is, how do you make it accessible to the consumer? And so that's where I, sort of approached it at from my perspective, is how do I make it easy? How do I make it, and I will tell you, I carry a range of products. So, some are more affordable than others. It really depends on the brand. A lot of it has to do with the size of the brand. A lot of it has to do with where they produce specifically. So, for example, I have one company that produces almost exclusively in India. They're one of the larger, I wouldn't say they're a huge brand, but, they have a couple of stores of their own, within Europe or within Germany. But they're definitely larger compared to the other ones that I work with. And because of where they produce, because of their size, and also somewhat the nature of what they produce, the styles, they do a lot of repetitive styles. They solely work with organic cotton, EcoVero. They don't do wool, they don't do linen, they don't bring in other fabrics. So that really streamlines their operational costs, and, they'll work with a specific factory. There are just a lot of components that go into that. But with that said, they're probably one of my lowest price point brands. Now, it's not necessarily going to be, $39.95 for a dress from them, but it might be $79.95 for a dress from them, which is not outrageous for a global organic textile certified dress, made responsibly, ethically, all of those with organic cotton. When you consider that aspect of it and you look at the price point, I think there is a middle market there. Some of the brands are a little more expensive. I have one brand that almost exclusively manufactures in Europe. Now, it's going to be more expensive to manufacture in Europe. You're going to get a little more unique product. The fabrics are going to be a little bit more varied from what you get from them. But when I look at this area and I see what, when you think of what people spend on clothing, part of it is just saying, well, can I have 5 things instead of 15? Because for that same, I might buy 15 dresses at $40. Could I buy 5 or 6 or 7, at $80 and be happy? And I think, a little bit of it is shifting that. The other strategy I will tell you is all those emails you get. I get them too. I have kids. So I can't outfit my children for my store. It's always like, 20% off, 30% off, and you're bombarded with these emails. And I think a lot of that, again, it gets back to the psychology of you're like, oh, I need to buy it now. Oh, they have a sale. And then, for me, I've become a little desensitized too, because I follow a lot of what brands do from a business standpoint to see what they're offering, what sort of things. And you're like, and you realize every week there's going to be another sale, and it starts to lose that kind of endorphin producing reaction, if you will, of I've got to get this now, or I've got to buy 5 because then it'll be so much cheaper, right? And
you get free delivery.
Free delivery. So it's keeping all those emails in a separate email that isn't your main one that you check every day. I think that's a huge strategy for people, just to not constantly think oh, this is what I need to do. I need to shop. I need to, or oh, they're having a sale. So kind of separating yourself a little bit from the adrenaline rush of consumption, I think is helpful. I pretty much almost exclusively shop in my store right now. There's a few things I might not be able to get there. Sometimes it feels limiting, because you're oh, you see a style or a design from someone else and you think oh, that's really cool. But at the same time, for me, material is so important, whether it's the dyes, the chemical finishers, all of that is just from a personal standpoint so important to me. And I always say I'd love to see us get to a point where you can shop anywhere and find sustainably produced garments. I think that's really the goal. And I do think a lot of that has to do with, government regulation, incentive, and consumer behavior. It's a whole thing. But yeah, I mean, as far as brands, I mean, you can go to my website, you can see the brands that I have. And I look out for new ones. It's, and I see a positive thing happening in the marketplace. I do see larger brands starting to adopt some of these more sustainable fibers. I do see them starting to adopt the certifications. And I think that that's a really positive thing. It doesn't totally get into the overconsumption aspect. And I'm feeling, like I said, very torn about that, doing what I do, because it does feel like you have customers, when are you getting new stuff in? They always ask you, when are you getting new stuff in? And then you have inventory, and then things don't sell, and you start to think like, gosh, is this really the place I want to be in, creating more waste? And it kind of goes back to what you said, and it goes to what you're doing, is that maybe we need a whole cultural shift to what is typically called like bespoke production, where we start doing a lot more made-to-order clothing. And I think, if we really wanted to create a solution quickly, we would move in that direction. It's a lot harder. The other thing we haven't brought up is time. And it speaks to sort of you and your the people that you live in your community with, is everybody feels like, I don't have time to do this. And you can literally go online at 2 a.m, order your whole outfits for the next year, right? It's easy. They come to you, you try them on at home. If you don't like it, you ship it back, right? It takes a lot of time to operate in a more sustainable way. And and maybe part of it is we just need to slow down. I mean, oh boy. We've got the rain. But, I think about that a lot. We have major issues, major concerns, from a climate standpoint, from an environmental standpoint, is part of that solution that we need to figure out how to slow down.
I do like shopping, unfortunately, but I'm also lucky. I have 2 sisters, so and we don't live in the same country, so whenever we see each other, we come back and we exchange.
Nice.
So that I do a lot of like exchanging, or even with friends. Like, I have this T-shirt I've been wearing for like 5 years. Do you want it, or do you have to give me an extra? We do a lot of that, so I'm lucky to have that. Otherwise, I have the same rule as Rafi. If I buy now, I go on the real. I go on Vestiaire Collectif. So secondhand, vintage. I love vintage. I spend hours looking for specific things. So it makes me happy. If I spend the money, I spend, and then I won't spend on. I won't buy. So I buy really a couple of beautiful pieces that I have. Obviously, I shop at my store too. Because I love the brands that, it's mainly linen, a lot of cotton, a lot of silk. We work with a lot of small brands from Mexico, from Colombia, from Ghana and Ivory Coast, so it's closer also to home for me, and I like having fun with that. And one last thing I wanted to mention, so yeah, the secondhand shopping, vintage is amazing. The reselling platforms are really useful right now. So, with that, it's same with when you have kids. There's a lot of reselling platform or exchanging. It's the same thing between us. Everyone who has a kid, they put their stuff on the side, and then they give it to us whenever we're ready. So again, the community aspect of it is amazing. And just, be mindful. It's not the end of the world to stop shopping. We always say we need fashion, we need the industry, because those people in Bangladesh, in India, in Vietnam, they need jobs. So we don't want to stop those factories from working. We just want to make sure that they're getting what they deserve to get. But the idea is not to stop producing. The idea is to change the way we consume, and change the way we care, and change the way we keep our clothes in our closet for a longer time. And just have fun, be creative. One dress can turn into, different things. The last thing I wanted to do, we started doing that with my partner. We exchange clothes, so we buy a lot of unisex clothing, non-binary, and I'm wearing his suit today. So, so we start doing this. Sometimes it's a bit too small on him, I must say, but we're loving it. We're just enjoying, just sharing and changing and exchanging our clothes.
Just having like a simple ground rule,
Yeah,
just of
we're
like
loving it.
this is how I shop, sort of slows down your consumerism,
Yeah.
and it makes you make some tougher choices, so you don't just make impulse buys.
Exactly.
So just setting a simple ground rule: I'm not going to buy anything online, or I only buy it in person, or it'll only be on sale. I can't buy retail. I have to pay sale price. Some kind of ground rule is a good start to slowing down the consumerism. And once you start slowing down, you start seeing more things. And you realize,
it's fun also.
yeah,
It's actually
it's a
fun.
hunt. Yeah.
It's a hunt. You're more creative. You have fun with what you have, and then when you want something, you go online and you're like, and it's great when you receive it. You take care of it. You put it in your closet. That idea of caring. It's like food. It's like, you're mindful of what you put inside your body. Be mindful of what you put outside, and yeah.
Amazing. I think that's a great place to end with that
That's
line.
great.
Thank you guys so much for taking the
Thank
time
you.
to speak with us today. Thank you for being a great audience, coming with wonderful questions as well. We have plenty of food and drink. I'll pull out some wine now for those of you who want to skip the rain for a little bit. I heard hail today, so I really hope that doesn't happen.
It was confusing with these warnings.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank
Thanks for
you.
coming out.
Thank you.
Thank you.